Bring in show music, please.
Hi, I'm CNBC producer Katie Kramer. Today on Squawk Pod. Fighting for compensation for victims of the October 7th attacks, Anti-Defamation League CEO Jonathan Greenblatt on his plans and his support across the aisle.
On the Israel issue, it's bipartisan. Both sides have said and done the right things.
And what does it take to be a constitutional originalist? Author A.J. Jacobs lived like it was the 1780s in an attempt to better understand our founding document.
The founders were much more flexible in their thinking than we are. We are so intransigent, so tribal nowadays.
Plus, today's headlines that got us squawking, fighting over Paramount, the sequel, the SCOTUS decision on presidential immunity, and the Department of Energy's latest oil release. Can we find common ground?
My horoscope today said, if one of your colleagues has a good idea, don't reject it. Just adopt it and go along with them, because they could have good ideas too.
It's Tuesday, July 2nd, 2024. Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue, please.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We're live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernan and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
A new suitor may be stepping up for Paramount Global, according to the New York Times' Dealbook. Media mogul Barry Diller exploring a bid to take control of parent company of CBS, MTV, and Nickelodeon. Diller ran Paramount, of course, Paramount Pictures back then in 1974. Later tried to acquire the studio in the early 90s, but was outbid by the late Sumner Redstone, whose daughter, Sherry, now controls the company. Earlier, CNBC.com reported that Paramount is having discussions with a number of companies to merge its struggling Paramount Plus, including Warner Brothers Discovery. The development's moving the stock this morning, but it's still down more than 30% in the last year. Of course, the big issue is not necessarily buying Paramount Global, but buying the national amusements business, and therefore it's always unclear what it will ultimately mean to the stock of Paramount Global. But an interesting sort of twist in the saga.
30
we actually
years
have had
ago,
Barry here
40 years ago.
a whole bunch of times talking about Hollywood and Paramount, and
Back to the Future.
He's been relatively down on the business, but has talked about the opportunity to actually fix it. And if you really think about IAC, one of the things they've done so well over the years is they have sort of brought things in-house, fixed them up, and then spun them out. That's sort of become the sort of IAC business model in some respects. And maybe this is part of that. Unclear where this whole situation stands, though.
Just interesting to see the idea of Barry back in doing this.
Although he's the guy who kept saying, don't abandon all the legacy media.
Yeah.
And,
It's kind of exciting.
in comparison, legacy's not looking too bad.
Another turn on the campaign trail now for both candidates. The Supreme Court decision granting former President Trump immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts while in office. Trump calling the decision, quote, a big win for our Constitution and for democracy. President Biden speaking with reporters about the Supreme Court ruling last night.
This nation was founded on the principle that there are no kings in America. Each of us is equal before the law. No one is above the law. Not even the President of the United States.
Former president's legal team reportedly taking action, sending a letter to the presiding judge in the hush money trial, asking to postpone sentencing and toss out the verdict. Do you want to opine? I'm actually very curious. Like my view of this,
I think we're going to,
and I'm very curious.
Of all of us, I think you're going to be fine with this. It's limited. It's not just about Trump. It's about any president that orders a drone strike and kill someone abroad after office, not being able to, have his political opponent, which we're seeing some of right now, not being able to do that. It does, for the Trump case, it throws a wrench in the works because it probably moves that trial past the election. But it doesn't mean he's not going to be prosecuted. This has to go back to that court, and they need to decide, did the things he do, was that in running the office of the president, or was it not? And if it's not, then he can still be prosecuted for it if it was not in the normal business of what presidents do. So I just think it does put more the onus on back to lower courts to decide what was a presidential action and what wasn't. But it seems like the only way you could do this without really making it impossible for a president to act.
let me read you just a piece of the dissent. For half
no,
a second.
I know
what,
and but that's totally ridiculous.
Hold on, they raise the prospect.
All those fear mongering.
Could you order the Navy SEAL?
No, you can't do that.
To assassinate a political rival. Well,
you can't do that.
She's the Supreme Court justice.
No, I know, but
immune.
and everybody is saying that the stuff she said, even Chief Roberts said, Chief Justice Roberts said, what Sotomayor is saying is ridiculous. You can't break the law. You can't kill someone like your political opponent. That's not in the normal course.
Organize a military coup to hold on to power. Immune.
Can't do that.
Take a bribe in exchange for a pardon. Immune.
Don't you?
Even if these nightmare scenarios never play out, and I pray they never do, she writes, the damage has been done. The relationship between the president
How would you do? What would you do? What would your decision have been? No immunity? I think you would have come to the same decision.
I expected a split.
I think you need some form of immunity. The question is on what grounds do you...
That's what they said.
It's impossible.
And the question is whether this is not too thin, but too broad.
But I think it would be impossible to strike a completely fair deal. I mean, how would you not go after Harry Truman for war crimes, for dropping the atomic bomb? I mean, there are certain situations where it's going to be very questionable, and this does.
But the question is, where does this land? Does this land in the? You just said to me that you don't think the assassinated political rival is.
There are still checks and balances. Look,
there's great area, and that's what this is intended to.
AOC yesterday filed impeachment provision for the Supreme Court. There's still impeachment. There's still you can't just break an American law unless it's in the part of the business of the president. And sending Navy SEALs to kill your opponent is not part of being president.
The idea of it
that would never happen.
In one direction or the other would be really difficult, just because
that's like the absurdist argument for what could. And everyone that looked at her, even Chief Justice Roberts, looked at what she said and said, "This is."
One
ridiculous.
of the things Chief Justice Roberts said in a footnote, which was a little concerning too, is the idea that no sitting president can have criminal proceedings brought after him, and bringing that out. And that brings back to reality what happens in this situation, where if Donald Trump is the president again, all of these issues get put away. He could find an attorney general who would then say, "Okay, I'm going to make sure we quash all of these."
And then the justice system doesn't work.
But I don't know how you come up with a ruling.
But also, Biden should like that because it makes it much more difficult. No one's going to be able to do anything to him either. You would want this. You would want this if you were a president. You would want this if you were otherwise you could not be president. You could not be and it's ever since supposedly there's a case back in 1982 from Nixon where you knew this was implied. You knew there was some implied immunity.
I think there should be some implied immunity. The question is to what degree it should be allowed.
Well, how would you parse it then?
How would you parse it for this context?
How would you parse it if you didn't say in conducting the official business of the presidency versus non-official business of the presidency? How would you parse it other than that?
Clear. The problem is you try and apply it to any of the situations today or beyond.
So
but
in this case, anything related to an election, electioneering, politics, fundraising.
I don't think it's clear.
All of that,
no, I don't think
you would think should be taken off the table.
None of those things.
Because I would argue that those are not in the context of an official.
Any of these things are going to need interpretation. Any of these things are going to need interpretation again by a court. Because there's no hard and fast rule that you can do.
And I think I would agree with you on that too.
But you're still going to need normal, reasonable adjudication of all these issues down the road. You know that, but in general, and I don't, you really, I think that you can throw up very scary scenarios about everything, and it's just not real.
No, but don't you think that in the context of politics, political fundraising, elections, and other things like that, that would not be considered in the official duties of being president?
It would not. No.
It would not.
No.
Okay, so then where does this land?
You would be. He could be prosecuted for what happened in Dick.
Yeah, those cases.
You also saw that Justice Roberts said the way that Trump is interpreting this is way beyond what we're giving him immunity on.
Well, to come back to New York and say that all that needs to be thrown out when most of those activities took place before he was even president. I mean, that's there is some evidence in that.
The only thing that would maybe speak to me is that you're not going to. The actual interference on January 6th, if you think Donald Trump was behind that and actually is culpable for that, voters are not going to have that decision before November. Right. Okay, That makes it sort of a troublesome. If you want to say that, fine. But he's still liable. And even after, if he were to become president, he's still liable because those actions were probably not covered. Probably
it could change the outcome of the election.
It could, like the laptop could have, but of course we know 51 guys said that was Russian disinfo, as organized by Antony Blinken.
Never. The last word, always to Joe Kernan.
Something up my rear.
The Department of Energy is selling 1 million barrels of gasoline in a move that the White House says will lower prices ahead of the July 4th holiday weekend. The fuel will come from the Northeast Gasoline Supply Reserve. 5 oil companies are buying that gasoline, with BP taking the largest share at 500,000 barrels. The companies are paying an average of $2.34 a gallon. A record 70 million plus Americans are expected to travel for the holiday, including more than 60 million by car.
Does this trouble you or not?
This?
Yeah.
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not
Gasoline
at all.
sale?
No, the gasoline sale.
Gasoline sale.
Oh, I thought you were talking about your.
No.
I thought you were starting.
Gasoline sale ahead, not just ahead of the July 4th weekend, but ahead of the election.
Ahead of the election.
You know what,
and
Andrew?
trying to short things.
I'm exhausted. The SPR, we've talked about that a lot.
SPR, yeah.
I'm my horoscope today said if one of your colleagues has a good idea, don't reject it. Just adopt it and go along with them, because they could have good ideas too. And I'm like, that's going to be Andrew, and it's going to be another thing like we started agreeing a couple of days ago on something. Yeah. And now, yeah.
I need to get a hold of the horoscopes.
You do beforehand to know how I'm going to. But yes, I think it's another. I mean, it's not surprising, but it's. I like lower gasoline prices. Everyone does. Should we be using things like this to do it at this point? I think.
Okay, then let me pick up where I would have expected you to say this, which is, do we really think the government is good at market forces, at timings?
No, they're going to buy. They're going to buy high and sell low, typically. Lazary. Remember we were talking to him. He sold his stake in the Bucks.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And now these guys.
And I think Mark Cuban sold the Mavericks and retained 27% in control, but it's weird because these guys love having the team, but if it gets worth a lot, they're still ready.
They're still investors and traders.
Even if they got $3 or $4 billion,
right.
If it's worth $1 billion, it's like, I'm taking my billion. But Boston Celtics are up for sale just weeks after winning an 18th title. The Celtics ownership group announced that it plans to sell the team. The controlling family of the ownership group, Boston Basketball Partners, Basketballs, said it intends to sell all of its shares in the team for estate and family planning consideration. The sale of a majority stake expected to be completed by the end of this year or early 2025. The remainder of the sale closing in 2028. And that was according to the statement. The Celtics could fetch a record price for an NBA team. The Phoenix Suns sold recently for $4 billion in 2023.
Cheese will be next.
Coming up on Squawk Pod, how the Anti-Defamation League aims to hold Hamas backers accountable for October 7th. The group is suing Iran, Syria, and North Korea. CEO Jonathan Greenblatt explains.
We're representing 130 individuals or families, Joe, all of whom's lives were irrevocably altered.
Yeah,
so
I understand that, but I
will get them financial relief.
Time could be really
financial
from
relief
Iran.
Matters.
From Iran. And Syria.
Again, from these seized assets.
Welcome back. This is Squawk Pod from CNBC.
Up and Becky, Q.
I'm Becky Quick, along with Joe Kernan and Andrew Ross Sorkin.
The Anti-Defamation League has now filed a lawsuit against Iran, Syria, and North Korea, alleging that each state supplied material support to Hamas for its October 7th attack. The lawsuit seeking financial compensation for over 100 plaintiffs, many of whom are American. Joining us right now with more on this, Jonathan Greenblatt, Anti-Defamation League CEO and National Director. And why don't we just take a full step back for just a moment to explain how a lawsuit like this would even work.
Sure.
Given that we're talking about suing countries and the ability to collect, if you will, by its very nature is almost, I don't want to say impossible, but nearly so.
So 1976, the Congress passes the U.S. Foreign Sovereigns Act, which entitles these different countries to immunity, diplomatic immunity, except in the cases where there are state sponsors of terror. So countries are on a list that's established by the U.S. government if they are determined to be state sponsors of terror organizations. And that list includes countries like, it's included many over the years. Right now, Iran, North Korea, Syria, and also Cuba is on that list. So in 2015, the U.S. government established a fund, the U.S. Victims of State-Sponsored Terror Fund. It is comprised of monies that have been, they're like seized assets, fines levied, et cetera. So there's no U.S. taxpayer dollars involved. So what we did yesterday at ADL with the law firm of Crowell and Mooring is we filed in federal court a lawsuit on behalf of Americans who were attacked, wounded, or killed in the attack on 10/7. And what we're going to prove is that Iran, North Korea, and Syria were complicit in the Hamas attack because they provided material resources, financing, or actually training to the terror organization.
And what's the just from a practical perspective? What's the process, the legal process that this will go through?
Well, we filed in court. It's not easy to serve them. Right. So I can't just walk up to Khamenei and hand him papers. That takes a few months to do through channels. And then we're going to have to make our case in front of a judge. It's not a jury trial, so we'll be seen in front of a judge who will look at the evidence. Now, it's very possible that, Ayatollah Khamenei can send a defense attorney. Unlikely to happen, Andrew. So in reality, we will probably be presenting our case
without a defense.
Without them filing an official defense. And the judge will evaluate the materials and then, I believe, find in our favor.
Try to get rid of the rest of the squad. Spend your money effectively. You got rid of, and Bowman's gone. There's about 3 or 4 other ones.
Okay, well, that's a different thing.
He's already, he's shifted the conversation. I was going to go there eventually, but we might as well go there directly.
This is, you're not going to get anywhere. Go do something you can actually do.
We're representing 130 individuals or families, Joe, all of whom's lives were irrevocably altered.
So I understand that, but I
will get them financial relief.
Time could be really from Iran.
Matters.
From Iran and Syria.
Again, from these seized assets.
Okay.
So we're going to do that, number one. And number two, we're going to demonstrate the complicity of Iran in particular. I mean, look, their largest export is anti-Semitism. They're the single state sponsor of terror. And we have all these 10/7 deniers right now. People saying the attack didn't happen. People saying that women weren't raped.
The ones in Congress. That's what I'm saying. Maybe work on some domestic issues.
We do that as well. And look, I think I look forward to Congressman Bowman returning to his post as a middle school
He's a fire marshal, isn't he?
Somewhere. Maybe he's trying out for that job.
Good at.
He knows how to do it.
Weigh in. We have obviously been talking about the debate and the debate performance by President Biden and obviously former President Trump, and how you think about both of these candidates in the context of anti-Semitism here in the U.S. and around the world, but also in the context of what you think is happening in Israel, Gaza.
It's complicated, but not complicated. So on the one hand, President Biden has been rock solid on this war. He went and visited the war cabinet just weeks after the 10/7 attack. He has been clear again and again, and so have people like Jake Sullivan, Secretary Blinken, et cetera. Now, on the other hand, President Trump has also said things that have been positive in support of Israel. So I hope whoever gets elected, they continue to maintain the bilateral relationship.
Say that it's not? Netanyahu would have a different viewpoint of Joe Biden.
You'd have to ask Bibi Netanyahu.
I don't have to ask him. I've seen his quotes that weapons are being withheld by the U.S., by Joe Biden to Israel.
Look, massive amount.
You're just playing both sides.
I'm not trying to play both sides, but I think this is a bipartisan issue.
You think Netanyahu's happy with Biden?
I have not asked the prime minister.
Do you think he is?
I think he's happy with a lot of what he's gotten from the president. Yeah. I know well, wait a second. The truth is, Joe, is that I talk to people around BB, and they tell me they're very happy with the support that they've got.
Maybe he's just.
Is there more that can be done?
Maybe he's just posturing then. But
maybe it's posturing.
You think that we should be withholding? You think we?
No, I do not.
And how about some of the other pressure that's been brought to bear? The PR is bad enough already without President Biden adding, fanning the flames. Look, Israel shouldn't be allowed to do what it needs to do.
Israel needs to do what it needs to do to bring all the hostages home and to end the reign of this terror organization.
Right, and I know you don't want to be political. The reason I'm asking, though, the question is I think that there are a lot of, especially American Jews, but others that are trying to figure out if that's going to be your single issue, if you're a single issue voter.
Like Israel, you mean you're single
Israel. Issue? If you're a single issue voter on that, score. You know, which candidate do you think is going to be the better candidate, if you will, right? I'm just asking the question. That's the question that people are asking around the dinner table.
I get asked this question a lot, too. I think the good news is that other than extremists, particularly on the far left, Israel remains a bipartisan issue. This White House has been incredibly supportive. The things that come out of Trump camp have been incredibly supportive. When Trump was in office, he did the Abraham Accords, which were very positive. He moved the embassy, which people believe was the right thing to do. So I think, look, on the Israel issue, it's bipartisan. Both sides have said and done the right things.
Trump. And Joe thinks they haven't, but that's...
Trump. I hear you, Joe. I understand what you're saying.
It's nice to see you.
Always good to see you guys.
Thank you. We look forward to following the progress of this lawsuit and talking to you.
Thank you.
I was trying to throw my...
Next on Squawk Pod, party like it's 1789. Author A.J. Jacobs spent 1 year trying to follow as literally as possible in the footsteps of the American founders, living constitutionally, even with quill pen and tricorn hat. He tells us why the 18th century history is so relevant today.
Ben Franklin said, the older he gets, the less certain he is of his opinion. So it's patriotic to change your mind.
Wow, that would actually be a big one.
I know.
You're listening to Squawk Pod with Joe Kernan, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Here's Andrew.
We are just days from the July 4th holiday, marking the start of this country nearly 250 years ago, and the work that the founders did still impacting our lives in many ways. We were just talking about this court case. The Supreme Court is ruling today. Our next guest set out to live their example of it and wear their tricorn hats, immersing himself in the 1780s. Join us right now with the hat on, A.J. Jacobs, one of the great authors. The book is called The Year of Living Constitutionally, One Man's Humble Quest to Follow the Constitution's Original Meaning. And I've been reading you for so many years. I can't even believe it. It's been like 20 years, actually, maybe more.
Not quite since 1780, but for a long time.
But close. So here you are, walking around New York City with a quill pen and more, doing all sorts of things to try to live the way you think the founders lived. What were you trying to do?
Well, first of all, good morrow. I didn't say that. Secondly, I did this because, as you've seen, as you just mentioned, the Constitution has a huge impact on our lives. And I realized a couple of years ago, I never even read it, not from start to finish. So I thought, as a writer, I need to understand this 240-year-old document. And the way I like to understand things, dive in, live them. So I said, I'm going to understand it using the tools and mindset of our founding fathers. That meant a musket on the streets of New York, writing with a quill pen, quartering soldiers.
You're a method actor, a method writer.
I am a method writer. That's an excellent description. And it was absurd at times, as you can see, but it was a serious point. How do we interpret this document?
So what was the big lesson?
Oh, many big lessons. One is the founders were much more flexible in their thinking than we are. We are so intransigent, so tribal nowadays. Ben Franklin said that the older he gets, the less certain he is of his opinion. So it's patriotic to change your mind.
Wow, that would actually be a big one.
I know.
For this planet.
Can you imagine? That they didn't see the two-party system coming. So
what do you think they would think of this now?
Oh, they would be shocked. I mean, some parts they would love. Ben Franklin, I think, would love, I don't know, the internet. But so much of America, they would be shocked
Did you
at.
become an originalist for the Constitution, or do you think it needs to be interpreted in view of the way things are today?
I think a bit of both. You need to look at the original meaning, but you also need to weigh in the consequences.
I was thinking, okay, we don't have quills, but we walk around with pens. People in New York, certain areas in New York, it may not be a musket, but there's certainly a lot of people walking around with firearms in New York. So it's not maybe that different. They just don't have the funny hat. But they have other funny hats.
They do have other funny hats. Well, I would argue that the past really was a different place. It was a different country. And you brought up guns. I had a musket, and I went and fired a musket. That is a very different machine. Yeah. It takes 15 steps. You got to put in the gunpowder, and it's like building a desk from IKEA. It takes a long time.
Right.
So it is not the guns we have
And you can forget the the ball, and then that's where the expression "blow your wad" comes from, because the only thing that goes out is the cotton or whatever it is in there, right?
Exactly, and flash in the pan, also from muskets.
Flash in the pan.
Okay, so but now that you know that, and we talk about guns and all sorts of issues, do you have a new view on that, or a different view?
Well, I believe that I do think there is a right to bear arms, but we've got to take into account how different the technology is. So in the book, I give an example. If there was a law from the 1800s that said wheeled vehicles are fine on this little country lane, and that meant carts, bicycles, then someone invents an 18-wheel Mack truck, that's a different machine. So we have to keep in mind that
what do you think the founding fathers would think of the way the Supreme Court ruled yesterday, trying to be originalists, if you will, on this issue around the president? Do you have any sense of that now?
I have a lot of thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts. They would be shocked, both by the Supreme Court and by the president, how powerful they are. They were not, neither was supposed to be this powerful. It was Congress. Congress was first in the Constitution. And the fact that even before the ruling yesterday on immunity, the president, they would be appalled by how powerful the president has become. And originally, George Washington made 8 executive orders. Obama and Trump both made over 200. So it's
and more
both
now.
cross-party. What?
More in the last 3.5 years.
Yeah, it is unbelievable. When the idea of a single president came up in the convention, a lot of the delegates said, "Are you jesting? We just fought a war to get rid of the king. Why would we want another king?"
They still did a pretty good job.
They did, well, yeah.
There's checks and balances, and I would argue there's still checks and balances.
Well, I would argue not enough checks and balances, that the Supreme Court has way too much power. We need to give
Okay, so the Supreme Court and the president both have too much power?
Absolutely. Congress is what the founders wanted.
Right,
That's closer to the people.
But back to the idea then of switching your views and things. Today, Congress is so intransigent in this two-party system that is maybe 4 parties, depending on how you think about it. How different is that today than it was then?
Well, they did have parties pretty quickly, but the founders never wanted that. They didn't. Madison said, there's going to be factions, but he thought there were going to be lots of factions, almost like a European country.
No.
Where you had, that is,
we don't want that. I know, but we don't want that. We're doing just fine.
Oh, I see. You don't want that. But that is what
No, I don't want that. And I don't want to be like Europe. And I'm happy with the way things, what our forefathers set up for us. And it seems to be the greatest system in the world.
Wasn't the plan.
This was not the plan. Whether or not you like
one
it
man's
or not,
opinion.
My point is, this was not the plan.
Can I just ask you a human question about this idea of the flexibility? Because I do agree that right now, we don't seem to be in a flexible world. But I would have thought the idea of hypocrisy and the idea of changing your mind and saying one thing and then having a different view, the human condition, whether it's today or 200 years ago, would have been very similar, meaning people would have called you out for that, irrespective of the reason I'm asking is you're suggesting that would be normal and nobody would call you out for it, or no?
Well, hypocrisy is different than changing your mind. They were... Ben Franklin on the convention floor told a great story. He said, there was this French lady who said to her sister, "Why is it so strange? Why am I the only person who is right on every single issue?" And his point was, we all think we're that French lady. We all think we're right on every issue. The founders were very good at looking at the evidence, weighing things. They did not like hot takes. They wanted cold takes. Let reason trump passion. So that is something I think is worth...
They would be appalled by social media.
Oh my goodness, they would not know what to make of it. Yeah, they would. It's their worst nightmare. It really is.
A.J. Jacobs, the book is The Year of Living Constitutionally, and it's an education, and a fun education, on where the country was and maybe where it is today. So thank you. Make sure you join us tomorrow, one day before the big day, Independence Day. Make sure you join us tomorrow.
Bonjour. And that's Squawk Pod for today, July 2nd. It was on the 2nd of July, 1776, when the Continental Congress officially declared independence from Great Britain. Hey, listen to this podcast to get information like that and the best of CNBC's Squawk Box every day. We'll meet you back here tomorrow.